education growing up has been through music. And if you look at it in most parts of the world, music has always chronicled histories of various countries. You know, different parts of history, different eras of different countries have always been chronicled through music. So that's why, as I said, most of my education has been through music. And again, it's through music that I felt a very deep connect with nature. Now, during those days, it was very difficult for me to explain to people when I would tell them that, you know, that music and nature for me is one and the same thing, and I cannot differentiate between music and nature. And even you guys sitting over here might wonder that music is an art form, nature is something that, you know, that exists all around us. So how can these two things be the exact same thing? But of course, now I can make some kind of descriptions as to why I feel that music and nature is one and the same, because at the end of the day, how did music start, you know? Music started off as sounds from within nature. Music started off as sounds of the birds, sounds of the animals, sounds of the rivers flowing, sounds of the rain falling, sounds of the wind moving against leaves of trees and things like that. And then later on it evolved to humans trying to imitate those sounds, and that's what became the genesis of, you know, tribal music and things like that, where humans were just trying to imitate those sounds and making them more pleasing to our ears. And it's only for the last maybe about 400 or 500 years that music has actually become academic, with notes and scales and rags and things like that. So music has started off from nature, and that's why I believe that music and nature is one and the same thing. And classmates of mine, or even my parents or my brother, used to run away from seemingly dangerous animals all the time from in our home, living, because I grew up for the first 8 years of my life in North Carolina in America, and you know, we used to have snakes in our home all the time. We used to have reptiles. We used to have rodents. We used to have all sorts of animals entering our compound all the time. And when my parents and when my brother would run away from these seemingly dangerous animals, I was always very drawn towards them. I would look into the eyes of these animals. I would try to see personality in every single animal. And I used to ask these weird questions to my parents that, you know, is this our world or is it their world, or what is this, and like, you know, who actually owns the earth and things like that. And basically I used to have all these existential questions growing up, and my parents used to call me weird. But then growing up I realized that all of us are basically one family, and it's not their world or our world, it's basically our world. So in a short span of 12 years, I did commercials for pretty much every brand imaginable and their competitor. These big brands have understood the power of music. Now, they've understood the power of music as being a very, very powerful language, not just for communicating a message, but for retaining that message deep into the consciousness of a listener. Like the songs that we learn during our childhood are the songs that we remember forever. The morals that we learn through those songs are morals that stick with us forever. Am I right? The jingles and the songs that you've learned during your childhood, have you ever forgotten them? So that's the way it is. So music is such a powerful language. And I was very ashamed that I, being a musician, have not harnessed the power of music, whereas these big brands have understood the power of music to drive a message of sales, and because they're always trying to sell something. So they've understood the power of music so strongly that they're ready to pay a couple of $1,000s to me to actually create music for them to drive a message of sales. And not only that, they're ready to spend a couple of $1 million to actually air this music on television and radio. That is when I decided very strongly that I'm going to stop all forms of commercial music, and the only kind of music I'm going to make is about creating positive social impact. And every piece of music that comes out of my head, comes off my fingers, comes off my studio, is going to be about making this world a better place in my own small way, and making an effort through the powerful language of music. I met a wonderful musician from South Africa, a gentleman called Wouter Kellerman, a flute player. And I was a huge fan of his music, he was a huge fan of my music. And then we decided that we really, really need to work with each other. And we met in Los Angeles, and we had this beautiful meeting. And we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we work with each other? How do we collaborate? And then we came across a huge coincidence that I had just finished making a piece of music on our father of the nation, that is Mahatma Gandhi. And coincidentally, he had just finished making a piece of music on his father of the nation. Exactly, Nelson Mandela. We realized that there's a whole lot of cross-pollination between these two great leaders too, because as we all know, Mahatma Gandhi spent his formative years in South Africa, so he had a lot of South Africanness in him. And of course, Nelson Mandela was heavily inspired by the non-violence movement by Mahatma Gandhi, so he had a lot of Indianness in him. So then we decided that this is how we're going to work with each other. I will send you my Indian music and you add South Africanness to it, and you send me your South African music and I'll add some Indianness to it. So then in doing this, what we did was that we traveled around the world. We took 2.5 years off from our lives. We traveled around the world. We collaborated with a whole lot of musicians from every corner of the globe, and became hugely successful. We were #1 on the Billboard charts, the US Billboard charts for 12 weeks. We were the highest selling instrumental album in the whole world for 2014. We were the highest played album on radio in the whole world for about, I think, 2 months during 2014. But unfortunately, we were not played in India, but that's a story for a different talk. But nevertheless, we had all the success with this particular album, and this ended up with us winning the Grammy Award in 2015. Thank you. So these are pictures from there. And then after that, after I made this album, I made another album called Shanti Samsara, World Music for Environmental Consciousness. So this is my epic album for the environment, for climate change. And for this album, I collaborated. This time I was far more ambitious. I collaborated with 500 musicians from 40 countries. And I'll show you a couple of pictures. Like over here, you can see musicians from, you can see Amitabh Bachchan in the corner. There is musicians from Peru, musicians from Turkey, from Azerbaijan, from Nepal, from USA, the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra from London, musicians from Canada, from Denmark, from China, Vietnam, the Israeli choir, Ladysmith Black Mambazo from South Africa, basically musicians from Ghana. You can see Pandit Vishnu-Mohan Bhatt. So we had musicians from, as I said, 500 musicians from 40 countries, any corner of the globe where I could find a musician who felt strongly about the environment, who felt strongly about mitigating the effects of climate change. I basically collaborated with them. And this ended up being released at the Climate Change Conference in Paris, the Paris Climate Change Conference, which happened in 2015, the COP21. It was the biggest conference by the United Nations, where 195 countries came together to sign a deal to mitigate the effects of climate change and to understand how all of our countries could reduce our carbon footprints and thus, stall, at least, if not stop, then at least stall the existential crisis that climate change is causing on all of us. So it was launched over there by the then French President François Hollande and our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And then after that, I've gone on to performing this album in more than, I think right now we've crossed about 30 countries. So here are some pictures of these performances. So we have quite large-scale, powerful performances. In this performance, Vishnu-Mohan Bhatt had joined us. This is a performance we did for World Environment Day, as you were there, Vasanti, at the India Gate. This is another picture of that performance. This, I'm not sure where it was. And this was in Canada. In Vancouver, we had about 18,000, 20,000 people for this concert. This was at the Vidhan Sauda, our state parliament house in Karnataka. We did a concert over there. This was at the Mysore Palace. We had about 25,000 people who came for this concert. And all my concerts are about the environment and nature. Some more, just to show you the scale. This was at the United Nations headquarters in Geneva. We performed to a whole lot of presidents and prime ministers all over the world. This is the interiors. We basically converted their assembly hall into a concert hall. So it was quite exciting. Another picture. This is my performance at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Again, we converted the New York General Assembly into a concert hall for all the world leaders. Talk about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, when we talk about the world is one family, when we talk about coexistence. For some reason nowadays, the only thing that comes to our mind is living in absolute peace and harmony between Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, basically different parts of the human race. Because somewhere along our journey of being humans, we have absolutely forgotten that we are not the only species on this planet. We're just one among millions and millions of species on this planet. In fact, according to any ancient culture, leaving aside our Indian culture, leaving aside Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, any ancient culture, anywhere in the world, without exception, has always defined coexistence as living in absolute peace and absolute harmony with every single entity on this planet, whether living or non-living. So basically, they have not only gone on to expanding it beyond humans, but all life, and not only all life, but also all living and non-living entities. Which means that we not only have to coexist with all life, which we are not doing very well right now, but we also have to coexist with entities like, we have to coexist with the land we walk on, we have to coexist with the air we breathe, we have to coexist with the water we drink, and so on and so forth. So basically, I'm really proud that as Indians, we have coexisted with our forests and wildlife for the longest period of time. And that's the reason why we still have forests and wildlife in our country. We've coexisted with the forests and wildlife for the longest period of time, and that is because we revere our forests and wildlife. We in fact pray to our forests and wildlife. And emblematic of this reverence, emblematic of this prayer to our forests and wildlife is one particular elephant, one particular animal, and that is the elephant. So who over here loves the elephant? Come on. Yeah, everybody except for the people taking pictures. So anyway, so basically emblematic of our reverence to the forests and wildlife is basically the elephant. But with growing, as we all know over here, again I'm preaching to the choir over here, that with growing human population, with fragmentation of the elephant habitat for various reasons, due to degradation of the elephant habitat, due to human greed, we have human and elephant conflict happening in our country. And during this human and elephant conflict, what happens normally is that, obviously, the humane solution when there is loss of life on the human side is basically to capture these elephants and to relocate these elephants. So capturing and relocation is basically the humane solution, it is the logical solution, and of course it is better than actually shooting down and killing the elephant, but nevertheless, it is the best solution that our authorities can find as of now. And our authorities are sometimes absolutely forced to capture and relocate these elephants. But this capturing and relocation process itself is extremely mentally traumatic, excruciating, and painful. Obviously, for the animals, for the elephants themselves, but also for all the humans involved, especially for the forest department that is involved in these capturing and relocation processes. Which begs to ask the question that why can't we just coexist with these elephants? Why can't we coexist with the animals of the forest? Of course, the thing is that we've reached such a stage of innovation. Humanity's reached such a beautiful stage of innovation where we're innovating about everything, but we are just not innovating when it comes to coexistence. The innovations that we come up with are absolutely ridiculous innovations, like building walls and fences and and things like that. When these things are basically not even innovative ways of solving problems. Nevertheless, enough of that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to play you a song that I created on coexistence, on the capturing and relocation of elephants. And this is a song called Love Divine. It's a song which tells all of us that the pain and suffering that we inflict on nature is pain and suffering that will eventually be inflicted on ourselves. And that's the absolute truth. It's not some wishy-washy, new agey kind of a statement. It's basically absolutely true, but sometimes the pain and suffering that we inflict on nature, what I'm saying is that it's eventually pain and suffering that will be inflicted on ourselves. Sometimes it does not come back to us and our immediate loved ones around us, but it comes back on the human species itself. And we as humans need to start thinking as a species. And if we start thinking as a species, we would not have any problems like climate change and and all these existential crises that we have. Anyway. Music I have is because of the country that I'm in. And so one particular song and one particular melody which I really love is basically our Indian national anthem. I really love this melody. I think it's a beautiful melody, and I wanted to create my own version of it. I wanted to create an instrumental version of this song. And while creating the instrumental version of our Indian national anthem, I needed to create a video for it, because as all of us know, nowadays when it comes to the consumption of music, we no longer just listen to music, but we actually watch music right now because of the various platforms that music is consumed on. So I had to make a video for it. And what normally happens in the videos of these patriotic songs or versions of the national anthem, you usually have film actors, you have celebrities, actresses, you have politicians, you have leaders, basically the different humans of that country, whether it's India or any other country. Whereas I wanted to showcase the true inhabitants of India. Now, who are the true inhabitants of India? As we all know, again, I'm preaching to the choir over here, but nevertheless, the true inhabitants of India, in my opinion, are the forests and wildlife, and I'm sure that all of you will agree with me. Yes. So the true inhabitants of India are the forests and wildlife because they have existed on our land long before any humans have ever set foot here. In fact, they have shaped our country, they define the beauty of our country, and they define our sustenance. Because as the human race, we depend on them for our own sustenance. Without them, we cannot exist. So, many a times, words, especially in today's times, words like patriotism, words like culture, words like tradition are constantly thrown around a lot. People are very confused as to what these words actually mean. In my opinion, when you talk about patriotism, when you talk about culture, when you talk about traditions, at the heart of it is basically coexistence. And I believe that we should use our patriotism, we should use our culture, we should use our tradition, we should make other people use their patriotism, their culture and their traditions and their strong feelings about this to actually conserve, to protect and to sustain our beautiful country, because with 1.3 billion people in our country and with the beautiful forests and wildlife that we have, if we save our forests and wildlife and we protect, conserve and sustain our forests and wildlife and our natural world, we are basically saving the world in the process. Am I right? Rise for the true citizens of India. Let us all rise for the Indian national anthem. In creating the music for this film, and I'm really thrilled that the filmmakers actually approached me, that's Kalyan Verma and Amog Varsha, they approached me to make the music of the film because since I mentioned to you that I've dedicated my life to making music only on the environment and on nature, I would have felt extremely bad if I had to watch the film and it wasn't my music, And it's in Karnataka, which is my state. So I'm really thrilled that they came to me to get the music done. And when I heard that David Attenborough was going to be doing the narration for the film, I really had to step up my game and I had to make sure that the music was truly, truly world class and my best ever work. And I also had to make sure that it is very responsible. The music has been very responsibly created. So now, the three points that I had to very carefully denote in the music. Number one is that I see a lot of documentaries, not a lot of natural history documentaries where certain animals are vilified. Like for example, sharks and, and tigers and even in things like, the Jungle Book and things like that where, certain species itself has been vilified. So I wanted to make sure that no species in this film is vilified through the music. And most of this vilification of animals happens through the music. Like if you look at Jaws, for example, the Steven Spielberg movie, the vilification of the shark, even though it is well within the script, the fear comes in from the music. And I wanted to make sure that you do not feel fearful of any animal, because as we all know now, that every single animal has got a place in the ecosystem, and we cannot vilify any animal just for consuming another animal. You cannot do that. The other thing is that when you look at a lot of natural history documentaries or short films which are made in India, the music is always your regular orchestral music. So I wanted to constantly remind, because these pristine forests could be found, sometimes some shots like some aerial shots and things like that could be found in another region which is not in India, in another part of Southeast Asia, or maybe even in Africa or something like that. There could be stuff which looks a little similar. Not entirely similar, but a little similar. So I wanted to, through the music, I wanted to constantly remind people that you are in Karnataka and you are in India. So through the music. So when you watch the film, you will see this, that you're constantly grounded in the fact that this, through the music, you're constantly grounded in this fact that this is actually India, and the India that we recognize. The third thing is that, and this is very difficult for me to explain, that I wanted to bring about the feeling of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam through the music. So that is why we use music from North India, from South India, we use Celtic music, we use Western classical music, we use contemporary elements, and the whole thing comes together beautifully, showcased. So it's basically international in nature, but with the soul of India. That's what the whole music is. And we wanted to showcase through this fusion of various genres, we wanted to showcase the feeling of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So there are a lot of things that you do not get through a film that you get in real life, like in the sense that you cannot smell the forest, you cannot feel the dance, you cannot do all of that, because you're not looking at it in real life. So basically music compensates for all of that, and my job as a musician is to compensate for all of that, make sure that you know that it's a dance, and make sure you know that what the mind frame that the animals have, number one, and number two is also that the director wants you to have.